Hi, welcome back. Guess what? We have 2 chapters left of this book. Can you believe it? Crazy but true. I really like this book. I hope you guys do too. All right, this one is called Soldiers. After the Indians had gone, a great peace settled on the prairie, and one morning the whole land was green. When did the grass grow? Ma asked in amazement. I thought the whole country was black, and now there's nothing but green grass as far as the eye can see. The whole sky was filled with lines of wild ducks and wild geese flying north. Crows cawed above the trees along the creeks. The winds whispered in the new grasses, bringing scents of earth and of growing things. In the mornings, the meadowlarks rose singing into the sky. All day, the curlews and killdeers and sandpipers chirped and sang in the creek bottoms. Those are all kinds of birds. Okay. Often in the early evening, the mockingbirds were singing. One night, Pa and Mary and Laura sat still on the doorstep, watching like little rabbits playing in the grass in the starlight. 3 rabbit mothers hopped about with lopping ears and watched their little rabbits playing too. In the daytime, everyone was busy. Pa hurried with the plowing, and Mary and Ma helped Ma plant the early garden seeds. With the hoe, Ma dug small holes and matted grass roots that the plow had turned up, and Laura and Mary carefully dropped the seed. Then Ma covered them snugly with earth. They planted onions and carrots and peas and beans and turnips, and they were all so happy because spring had come. And pretty soon they would have vegetables to eat. They were growing very tired of just bread and meat. One evening Pa came from the field before sunset, and he helped Ma set out the cabbage plants and the sweet potato plants. Ma had sowed the cabbage seeds in a flat box and kept it in the house. She watered it carefully and carried it every day from the morning sunshine to the afternoon sunshine that came through the windows. And she had saved one of the Christmas sweet potatoes and planted it in another box. The cabbage seeds were now little gray-green plants, and the sweet potatoes had sent up a stem of green leaves from every one of its eyes. Pa and Ma took the tiny plants very carefully and settled its roots comfortably in holes made for them. They watered the roots and pressed earth upon them firmly. It was dark before the last plant was in its place, and Pa and Ma were tired, but they were glad too, because this year they'd have cabbage and sweet potatoes. Every day they all looked at the garden. It was rough and grassy because it was made in the prairie sod, but all the tiny plants were growing. Little crumpled leaves of peas came up, and tiny spears of onions, and the beans themselves popped out of the ground. But it was a little yellow bean, coiled like a spring, that pushed them up. Then the bean was cracked open and popped into 2 baby bean leaves, and the leaves unfolded flat to the sunshine. Pretty soon they would all begin to live like kings. Every morning Pa went carefully whistling to the field and had planted some early sod potatoes, and some potatoes were saved to plant later. Now he carried a sack of corn fastened to his belt, and as he plowed he threw grains of corn into the furrows beside the plow's point. The plow turned over a strip of sod on top of the seed corn, but the corn would fight its way up through the matted roots, and there would be a cornfield. There would be a green cornfield for dinner some day, and next winter there would be ripe corn for Pet and Patty to eat. One morning Mary and Laura were washing the dishes and Ma was making the bed. She was humming softly to herself, and Laura and Mary were talking about the garden. Laura liked peas best, and Mary liked beans. Suddenly they heard Pa's voice, loud and angry. Ma quickly ran to the door, and Laura and Mary peeped out on the other sides of her. Pa was driving Pet and Patty from the field, dragging a plow behind them. Mr. Scott and Mr. Edwards were with Pa, and Mr. Scott was talking earnestly. "No, Scott," Pa answered him. "I'll not stay here to be taken away by soldiers like an outlaw. If some blasted politician in Washington hadn't sent out word it would be all right to settle here, I'd have been 3 miles over the line I wouldn't have been 3 miles over the line into Indian Territory. But I'll not wait for the soldiers to take us out. We're going now." "What is the matter, Charles? Where are we going?" Ma asked. "I don't know, but we're going. We're leaving here," Pa said. "Scott and Edwards say the government is sending soldiers to take all us settlers out of Indian Territory." His face was very red and his eyes were like blue fire. Laura was frightened. She had never seen Pa look like that. She pressed close against Ma and was still looking at Pa. Mr. Scott started to speak, but Pa stopped him. "Save your breath, Scott. It's no use to stay and say another word. You can stay till the soldiers come if you want to. I'm going out now." Mr. Edwards said he was going too. He would not stay to be driven across the line like an ordinary yellow hound. "Ride out to Independence with us, Edwards," Pa said, but Mr. Edwards answered that he didn't care to go north. He would make a boat and go on the river to some settlement farther south. "Better come out with us," Pa urged him, "and go down on foot through Missouri. It's a risky trip, one man alone in a boat, going down the Verdigris River among the wild Indian tribes." But Mr. Edwards said that he had already seen Missouri, and he had plenty of powder and lead. Then Pa told Mr. Scott to take the cow and the calf. He couldn't take them with us. Pa said, "You've been a good neighbor, Scott, and I'm sorry to leave you, but we're going out in the morning." Laura had heard this, but she did not believe it until she saw Mr. Scott leading away the cow. The gentle cow went meekly away with the rope around her long horns, and the calf frisky and jumped behind her. There went all the milk and butter. Mr. Edwards said he would be too busy to see them again. He shook hands with Pa, saying goodbye, Ingalls, and good luck. He shook hands with Ma and said, "Goodbye, ma'am. I won't be seeing you all again, but I sure will never forget your kindness." Then he turned to Mary and Laura and he shook their hands as well as if they were grown-ups. "Goodbye," he said. Mary said politely, "Goodbye, Mr. Edwards." But Laura forgot to be polite. She said, "Oh, Mr. Edwards, I wish you wouldn't go away. Oh, Mr. Edwards, thank you for going all the way to Independence to find Santa Claus for us." Mr. Edwards' eyes shone very bright, and he went away without saying another word. Pa began to unhitch Pet and Patty in the middle of the morning, and Laura and Mary knew it was really true. They were going away from there. Ma didn't say anything. She went into the house and looked around at the dishes not washed and the bed only partly made, and she lifted up both hands and sat down. Mary and Laura went on doing the dishes. They were careful not to let them make a noise. They turned around quickly when Pa came in. He looked like himself again, and he was carrying a potato sack. "Here you are, Caroline," he said, and his voice sounded natural. "Cook a plenty for dinner. We're going without potatoes, saving them for seed. Now we'll eat 'em up." So that day for dinner they ate the seed potatoes. They were very good. And Laura knew that Pa was right when he said, "There's no great loss without some great gain." After dinner he took the wagon boughs from their pegs in the barn. He put them on the wagon, one end in each bough in each iron strap. One no Let's try that again. He put them on the wagon, one end of each bough in its iron strap on one side of the wagon box, and the other end of its iron strap on the other side. Whoa! When all the boughs were standing up in their places, Pa and Mary spread the wagon cover over them and tied it down tightly. Then Pa pulled the rope in the end of the wagon, covered it till it puckered together, and left only a tiny round hole in the middle of the back. There stood the covered wagon all ready to load in the morning. Everyone was quiet that night. Even Jack felt that something was wrong. He lay down close to Laura when she went to bed. It was now too warm for a fire, but Pa and Ma sat looking at the ashes in the fireplace. Ma sighed gently and said, "A whole year gone, Charles." But Pa answered carefully, "What's a year amount to? We have all the time there is." Going Out, chapter 16. Are you ready? Last chapter, guys. Okay. There were no pictures in that chapter. Crazy. So here's the picture for chapter 16. Hopefully there's more. We'll see. After breakfast. Oh, I'm sorry. I did forget to show you that picture. I'm like, I thought I saw one. Let me make sure. Any more? No. Okay. Sorry. After breakfast next morning. See, because I read the text and I don't look at the pictures, so sometimes I don't realize there are. But I try to get you all the pictures. After breakfast next morning, Pa and Ma packed the wagon. First, all the bedding was made into two beds laid on top of each other across the back of the wagon and carefully covered with the pretty plaid blanket. Mary and Laura and baby Carrie would ride there in the daytime. At night, the top bed would be put in the front of the wagon for Pa and Ma to sleep in, and Mary and Laura would sleep in the bottom bed, there where it was. Next, Pa took the small cupboard from the wall, and in it Ma packed the food and the dishes. Pa put the cardboard under the wagon seat, and in front of it he laid a sack of corn for the horses. "It will make a good rest for our feet, Caroline," he said to Ma. Ma packed all the clothing into two carpet bags. That's what they used to use for suitcases. They're called carpet bags. Okay? They're soft and they have like a handle. Please tell me at the end what they use for luggage. Okay? They use carpet bags for luggage. Carpet bag is made out of cloth and it has a handle on top. Okay? Carpet bags, luggage. Write it down in the private messages. All right. Pa hung them to the wagon boughs inside the wagon. Opposite them he hung his rifle in its strap, and its bullet pouch and powder horn hung beneath it. His fiddle was in its box. He laid on one end of the bed where it would rise softly. Ma wrapped the black iron spider and bake oven and the coffee pot in sacks and put them in the wagon, while Pa tied the rocking chair and the tub outside and hung the water bucket and the horse bucket underneath. And he put the tin lantern carefully in the front corner of the wagon box, where the sack of corn held it still. Now the wagon was loaded. The only thing they could not take was the plow. Well, that could not be helped. There was no room for it. When they came to wherever they were going, could you close the window? Hang on, guys. Nancy's gonna close the window. And the door. That car alarm always goes off. A little better, yeah? Laura and Mary climbed into the wagon and sat on the bed in the back. Ma put baby Carrie between them. They were all freshly washed and combed. Pa said they were clean as a hound's tooth, and Ma told them they were bright as new pins. Then Pa hitched Pet and Patty to the wagon. Ma climbed to her place on the seat and held the lines. And suddenly, Laura wanted to see the house again. She asked Pa to please let her look out. So he loosened the rope in the back of the wagon cover, and that made a large hole. Laura and Mary could look out of it. But still, the rope held up enough canvas to keep Carrie from tumbling into the feed box. The snug log house looked just as it always had. It did not seem to know they were going away. Pa stood a moment in the doorway and looked all around inside. He looked at the bedstead and the fireplace and the glass windows. They were closed. Then he closed the door carefully, leaving the string out. Someone might need shelter, he said. He climbed to his place beside Ma, gathered the rein into his own hands, and chirped to Pet and Patty. Jack went under the wagon. Pet whined to Bunny, who came to walk beside her, and they were off. Just before the creek road went down into the bottoms, Pa stopped the mustangs, and they all looked back. As far as they could see, to the east and to the south and to the west, nothing was moving on all the vastness of the high prairie. Only the green grass rippled in the wind, and white clouds drifted in the high, clear sky. "It's a great country, Caroline," Pa said, "but there will be wild Indians and wolves here for many a long day." The little log house and the little stable sat lonely in the stillness. Then Pet and Patty briskly started onward, and the wagon went down from the bluffs into the wooden creek bottoms, and high in a tree top a mockingbird began to sing. "I never heard a mockingbird sing so early," said Ma, and Pa answered softly, "He is telling us goodbye." They rode down through the low hills to the creek. The ford was low and easy crossing. On they went across the bottoms, where antlered deer stood up and watched them pass, and mother deer with their fawns bounded into the shadows of woods, and up between the steep red cliffs the wagons climbed to prairie again. Pet and Patty were eager to go. Their hoofs had made a muffled sound in the bottoms, but now they rang on the hard prairie, and the wind sang shrill against the foremost wagon bows. Pa and Ma were still and silent on the wagon seat, and Mary and Carrie were still too. But Laura felt all excited inside. You never know what will happen next, nor where you'll be tomorrow when you are traveling in a covered wagon. At noon Pa stopped beside a little spring to let the mustangs eat and drink and rest. The spring would soon be dry in the summer's heat, but there was plenty of water now. Ma took cold cornbread and meat from the food box, and they all ate, sitting on the clean grass in the shade of the wagon. They drank from the spring, and Laura and Mary ran around in the grass picking wildflowers, while Mom tidied the food box and Pa hitched up Pet and Patty again. Then for a long time they went on across the prairie. There was nothing to be seen but blowing grass, the sky, and the endless wagon track. Now and then a rabbit bounded away. Sometimes a prairie hen with her brood of prairie chicks scuttled out of sight in the grass. Baby Carrie slept, and Mary and Laura were almost asleep when they heard Pa say, "Something's wrong there." Laura jumped up, and far ahead on the prairie they saw a small light-colored bump. She couldn't see anything else unusual. "Where?" she asked Pa. "There," Pa said, nodding with his head, nodding toward the bump. It isn't moving." Laura didn't say any more. She kept on looking, and she saw that the bump was a covered wagon. Slowly it grew bigger. She saw that no horses were hitched to it, nothing moving anywhere around it. Then she saw something dark in front of it. The dark thing was two people sitting on the wagon tongue. They were a man and a woman. They sat looking down at their feet, and they moved only their heads to look up when Pet and Patty stopped in front of them. "What's wrong? Where are your horses?" Pa asked. "I don't know," the man said. "I tied them to the wagon last night, and this morning they were gone. Somebody cut the ropes and took them away in the night." "What about your dog?" said Pa. "Haven't got a dog," the man said. "Jack stayed under the wagon. He didn't growl, but he didn't come out. He was a sensible dog, and knew what to do when he met strangers." "Well, your horses are gone," Pa told the man. "You'll never see them again. Hanging's too good for horse thieves." "Yes," the man said. Pa looked at Ma, and Ma barely nodded. Then Pa said, "Come ride with us to Independence." "No," said the man. "All we've got is this wagon. We won't leave it." "Why, man? What will you do?" Pa exclaimed. "There may be nobody along here for days, weeks. You can't stay here." "I don't know," the man said. "We'll stay with our wagon," the woman said. She was looking down at her hands clasped in her lap, and Laura couldn't see her face. She could see only the side of the sunbonnet. "Better come," Pa told them. "You can come back for your wagon." "No," the woman said. They wouldn't leave the wagon. Everything they owned in the world was in it. So at last Pa drove on, leaving them sitting on the wagon tongue all alone on the prairie. Pa muttered to himself, "Tenderfeet, everything they own and no dog to watch it. Didn't keep watch himself, and tied the horses with ropes." Pa snorted. "Tenderfeet," he said again. "Shouldn't be allowed loose west of the Mississippi." "But Charles, whatever will become of them?" Ma asked them. "There are soldiers at Independence," Pa said. "I'll tell the captain, and he'll send men out to bring them in. They can hold out that long, but it's lucky of them that we came by. If we hadn't, there's no telling when they would have been found." Laura watched that lonely wagon until it was only a small lump on the prairie. Then it was a speck. Then it was gone. All the rest of the day Pa drove on and on. They didn't see anybody else. When the sun was setting, Pa stopped at a well. A house had once been there, but it was burned. The well held plenty of good water, and Laura and Mary gathered bits of half-burnt wood to make the fire, while Pa unhitched the water and while Pa unhitched and watered the horses and put them on picket lines. Then Pa took the seat down from the wagon and lifted out the food box. The fire burned beautifully, and Ma quickly got supper. Everything was just as it used to be before they built the house. Pa and Ma and Carrie were on the wagon seat. Laura and Mary sat on the wagon tongue. They ate the good supper, hot from the campfire. Pet and Patty and Bunny munched the good grass, and Laura saved bits for Jack, who mustn't beg, but who could eat his fill as soon as supper was over. Then the sun went down, far away in the west, and it was time to make camp ready for night. Pa chained Pet and Patty to the feed box at the end of the wagon. He chained Bunny to the side, and he fed them all their supper of corn. Then he sat by the fire and smoked his pipe while Ma tucked Mary and Laura into bed and lay baby Carrie beside them. She sat down beside Pa at the fire, and Pa took his fiddle out of the box and began to play. "Oh, Susanna, don't you cry for me," the fiddle wailed, and Pa began to sing. "I went to California with a washpan on my knee, and every time I thought of home, I wished it wasn't me." "Do you know, Caroline," Pa stopped singing to say, "I've been thinking what fun the rabbits will have eating the garden we planted." "Don't, Charles," Ma said. "Never mind, Caroline," Pa told her. "We'll make a better garden. Anyway, we're taking more out of Indian country than we took in." "I don't know what," Ma said, and Pa answered, "Why, there's the mule." Then Ma laughed, and Pa and the fiddle sang again. "In Dixieland I'll take my stand and live and die in Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie." They sang with the light and a swing that almost lifted Laura right out of bed. She must lie still and not wake Carrie. Mary was sleeping too, but Laura had never been wider awake. She heard Jack making his bed under the wagon. He was turning round and round, trampling down the grass. Then he curled into the round nest with a flop and sighed with satisfaction. Pet and Patty were munching the last of their corn, and their chains rattled. Bunny lay down beside the wagon. They were all there together, safe and comfortable for the night under the wide, starlit sky. Once more the wagon was home. The fiddle began to play a marching tune, and Pa's clear voice was singing like a deep-toned bell. "And we'll rally round the flag, boys. We'll rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom then." Laura felt that she must shout too, but softly Ma looked in through the round hole in the wagon cover. "Charles," Ma said, "Laura is wide awake. She can't go to sleep, so much music as that." Pa didn't answer, but the voice of the fiddle changed. Softly and slurringly, yes, it began a long, swinging rhythm that seemed to rock Laura gently. She felt her eyelids closing. She began to drift over endless waves of prairie grasses, and Pa's voice went with her singing. "Row away, row over the water so blue, like a feather we sail in our gum tree canoe. Row the boat lightly, love over the sea, daily and nightly, I'll wander with thee. And that is the end of our story. Oh, it's so sad. They had to leave, yeah? Okay, so let me read to you about Laura Ingalls Wilder. Okay, her name is Laura Elizabeth Ingalls Wilder, was the second daughter of Charles Phillip and Caroline Lake Quinier Ingalls. She was born on February 7th, 1867, in a log cabin on the edge of the forest near Pippin, Wisconsin. She lived the childhood she described in her Little House books, traveling with her family by covered wagon through Kansas and Minnesota until her father at last established the Ingalls' permanent homestead near DeSmet in Dakota Territory. At 15, Laura began teaching school, and 3 years later, in 1885, she married Almanzo James Wilder. In December of 1886, her daughter Rose was born. Nearly 40 years later, Mrs. Wilder began writing the stories of her prairie childhood that were to become classics. In 1932, she published the first Little House in the Big Woods. 8 more books followed. The Wilders spent the remainder of their long, happy lives in Mansfield, Missouri, where Almanzo died at the age of 92 in 1949. When 90-year-old Mrs. Wilder died in 1957, her stories had been read and loved by millions of children and had earned themselves an enduring reputation. Okay? So, think about it. In her lifetime, when she was a kid, there were no cars, no airplanes, obviously no computers, cell phones, all that stuff that you guys have. But she, through her lifetime, got to see cars. She didn't die till 57, so there were airplanes. So it's pretty interesting how vast her life was with the changes that were around her. So by 57, there would have been televisions, and there would have been powered lawnmowers, and there would have been vacuum cleaners and toasters and ovens. So you didn't have to cook in a fireplace. So she really saw a lot of changes in her life. Okay? So that is all of Little House. Remember, the question you're supposed to answer is, what is a carpet bag? It is luggage that's cloth with a handle. Okay? So, I will see you later. Bye-bye, guys.